Welcome back, everybody, to another deep dive. We are diving into a collection of notes on some really interesting Indian writers and their works.
Cool.
So think of this as like a crash course
Yeah.
on a fascinating literary scene. One that's packed with stories of identity change and tradition kind of bumping up against the modern world.
Yeah, it's a pretty diverse collection that you've got here. It's like
Mm.
from bustling cities to quiet villages, historical epics to like personal struggles. And the thing is, it's really interesting how the settings, they kind of become characters themselves, you know what I mean?
Yeah, definitely. And like I was thinking about Rohinton Mysteries: A Fine Balance.
Oh yeah.
It takes place in Bombay during Indira
Yeah.
Gandhi's emergency. And it's crazy how he like uses the city, as this backdrop to capture all the craziness, the social and political turmoil of that time.
Right.
Like it's almost like a character itself,
Yeah.
adding to all the danger and the urgency and all that.
Exactly. And then you have R.K. Narayan with his fictional town of Malgudi. Yeah, it pops up in so many of his works, and it becomes like this microcosm of Indian society.
Oh, wow.
It's like stepping into a time capsule,
Right.
where you see the effects of change, but like on a smaller scale, like a personal scale.
Yeah. And I think about how Malgodi like becomes a character that we get to know over time.
Yeah.
Right. And that makes me think about how settings in books can sometimes affect me even more than the characters themselves.
Oh, for sure. For sure.
Like, have you ever felt that, like, where the place is so powerful?
Absolutely. Yeah. When a writer truly captures like the essence of a place, it becomes more than just like a setting. It like adds a whole other layer of meaning to the story.
Yeah, definitely. And speaking of layers,
Yeah.
we can't really talk about modern Indian literature without talking about identity. I mean,
Yeah.
it's a theme that runs through, like, pretty much all these works.
Yeah, it's everywhere.
Right? From, like, personal identity to cultural national identity.
Right.
I mean, these characters, they're constantly struggling with who they are in a world that's, like, always changing.
Right. It's like they're all searching for their place, but like the world doesn't always have like clear answers.
Yeah, exactly. And it's interesting to see how Amitav Ghosh tackles this, in Shadow Lines.
Oh, yeah, that's a good one.
He explores the idea of national identity during the partition of India and Pakistan. And he shows how, like, those shifting borders, how they affect people,
Yeah.
like a deeply personal way.
Yeah, and the book doesn't offer like easy answers,
Right.
but it really makes you think about how our sense of belonging can be so fragile.
Yeah. And then there's Farhadi Mukherjee.
Oh, yeah.
Her stories often focus on immigrants trying to adapt to a new culture, but also, like, holding on to their roots.
Yeah,
It's like the different kind of identity struggle,
for sure, for sure.
but it's just as powerful and relevant today.
Absolutely. And speaking of powerful voices, we can't forget about the women writers in modern Indian literature.
Right. Their perspective is so important to understanding the full picture of what's going on. Yes, especially in a society that's changing so rapidly.
Totally. And take Anita Desai, for example.
Okay.
Her novel, Cry the Peacock.
Oh, yeah.
It delves into the psychological complexities of the main character, the female protagonist with incredible depth and sensitivity.
Right.
And it's like a stark contrast to how women were often portrayed in like earlier literature.
It's like she's giving a voice to the inner lives of women, right?
Exactly.
Exploring their desires and fears and ambitions in a way that feels so personal, but also universal.
And then you have Shashi Deshpande's That Long Silence.
Oh, yeah.
This one really paints a poignant picture of a housewife searching for her own identity
Mm.
amidst, all the expectations of family and society.
It's powerful how she captures that feeling of being trapped by, like, all these norms,
Yeah,
and the struggle to break free,
it's true.
to define yourself, on your own terms.
It is. And, speaking of breaking barriers, Nayantar Sehgal was actually the first female Indo-Asian writer to gain widespread recognition.
Oh, wow. That's amazing.
Yeah.
I mean, that's incredible.
It really is. These women are pioneers,
Yeah.
leaving the way for future generations and challenging us to see the world differently.
Their stories are so essential to understanding the complexity of Indian society.
All right.
And speaking of complexity, we can't overlook how history has impacted this literary landscape.
You're absolutely right. Events like the partition of India and Pakistan in 1947, I mean, they left a huge mark on the nation, and you see these scars reflected in the literature.
Yeah, and it's hard to imagine the trauma and the upheaval that came with partition
Right.
and, Khushwant Singh's train to Pakistan.
Oh, yeah.
It doesn't shy away from that at all.
No, it
That's
does.
like a visceral account
Sure.
of the violence and displacement, told through the eyes of ordinary people who were just caught in the crossfire.
It's heartbreaking.
It is. And then you have Kapsi Sidhwa's Ice Candy Man. And it offers like a totally different perspective on the same event.
Really?
Yeah, it's seen through the eyes of this young Parsi girl.
Okay.
And it gives us a more intimate and maybe less political view of the chaos and the confusion of that time.
It's fascinating how two writers can approach the same thing from such different angles,
Right.
but both offer these valuable insights into the human experience.
Totally. And then going back to Rohit Mystery's A Fine Balance.
Yeah, yeah.
We talked about it earlier.
Yeah.
It really captures that fear and uncertainty during Indira Gandhi's emergency,
Uh-huh.
showing how these big political decisions can have like a devastating ripple effect on ordinary people's lives.
Yeah. It's a reminder that history isn't just something we read about in textbooks.
Right.
It shapes people's lives in these huge and unpredictable ways.
And what strikes me is how these writers don't shy away from the difficult parts of history.
They don't.
They confront it head on.
They do.
And it's like they're asking us to remember to learn from the past.
Yeah.
And to think about how these events are still shaping us today.
It's true.
Before we move on, though, I have to say I was blown away by how these ancient myths and folklore are woven into these modern works,
Oh, yeah, for sure.
It's like they're tapping into something ancient and timeless, like a collective unconscious or something.
Yeah, there's this beautiful interplay between the past and the present, you know?
Yeah.
Like Salman Rushdie's Midnight's Children, for example.
Oh, yeah, it's a great one.
He blends historical events with magical realism.
Right.
And he draws inspiration from these ancient Indian tales and epics,
Oh, wow.
creating this fantastical world that's both familiar and totally unique.
Yeah, and for anyone who doesn't know, magical realism is basically a genre where fantastical elements are woven into realistic settings.
Right.
It's like the impossible becomes possible.
It does.
Blurring the lines between reality and imagination. And speaking of imagination, we can't forget about Raja Rao and his book, The Chess Master and His Moves.
Oh, love that one.
Using a chess game as like a metaphor for philosophical exploration.
Oh, it's brilliant.
That's brilliant.
It speaks to how powerful these traditions are. They're not just stories from the past.
Right.
They offer a way to understand, the human experience, even in today's world.
Definitely.
It's like they're drawing from this deep well of cultural memory, to create something new and insightful.
Yeah, it's so cool.
It is cool. Yeah, it's like they're bridging the gap between this ancient wisdom and modern problems, showing how these stories still resonate with us today.
Totally. And it's interesting to think about the writers themselves, how their own backgrounds and experiences shaped the stories that they tell.
Yeah.
Like we have authors like R.K. Narayan who were born and raised in India, and you can really see that deep understanding of the culture woven into their work.
Right.
But then you have someone like Amitav Ghosh who's lived in multiple countries, bringing this more global perspective to the writing.
Yeah, it's like they're bringing all these different pieces of the puzzle together, right? Creating this really rich and multi-layered picture of Indian life.
Right. And it's not just about different cultures. It's also about giving a voice to those who have been marginalized.
That's true. Like Amprakash Valmiki.
Oh, yeah.
His autobiographical work, Juthan.
Oh, yeah.
It gives this really raw and unflinching look at the realities of caste discrimination.
It's such an important story.
It is.
Because it forces us to confront, these uncomfortable truths about injustice and inequality that still exists today.
It's a reminder that literature can be like a powerful tool for social change,
Yeah.
Giving a voice to the voiceless and making us examine our own biases.
Definitely. And speaking of powerful stories, we can't overlook the complexities of love and relationships. They're explored in such a nuanced way in a lot of these books.
Yeah, for sure. And there are so many different kinds of love stories being told,
Right.
Like Vikram Seth's A Suitable Boy, for example. It's
Yeah.
this huge, epic love story set against, all this historical upheaval. It's like this sweeping saga that captures love, family, and societal change.
That's cool.
Yeah. And then there's Anita Desai's In Custody.
Yeah.
This one delves into forbidden love.
Okay.
It's about this Hindi professor who falls for this aging Urdu poet.
Interesting.
Yeah. And it becomes like a catalyst for him, for self-discovery. Like,
Hmm.
he has to confront his deepest desires and, the limitations of his own life.
It's so interesting how they explore the power of connection
Mm.
and how love can challenge like our ideas of ourselves and the world around us,
Yeah.
you know? And I love how these writers don't shy away from portraying female desire.
No, they don't like Shobada's socialite evenings.
Oh, yeah, good one.
Her novel features all these women who are breaking free from traditional expectations,
Right.
seeking fulfillment outside of marriage. It's a really bold look at female agency and desire.
Yeah, it's refreshing to see these strong female characters who are like taking control of their lives and
Yeah.
challenging those norms.
It is.
And of course, we can't talk about love and loss without mentioning Arundhati Roy's The God of Small Things.
Oh, that book is a masterpiece.
It is.
It explores love, loss, and family with so much emotion.
Right.
It really leaves a mark on you.
Yeah,
Her writing is just beautiful,
it is.
and the story is both heartbreaking and hopeful at the same time.
It's definitely a book that stays with you long after you finished it.
It does.
It makes you think about life, love, family, all those things.
Mhm.
And speaking of family, it's striking how often family dynamics are at the heart of these narratives.
Absolutely. It's like family becomes this little microcosm of society,
Right.
reflecting these larger social and political forces that are happening.
Yeah, like in Arcane Orion's The English Teacher.
Oh, yeah.
It portrays this young professor going through grief and self-discovery after losing his wife.
Right.
And it's such a touching exploration of love and loss and finding meaning in the face of tragedy, you know?
It reminds you that even when you experience loss, there's still potential for growth.
Yeah. And then there's Kiran Desai's The Inheritance of Loss.
Oh, that's a good one.
It explores these complex relationships between a judge, his granddaughter, and their cook.
Okay.
And it all takes place against the backdrop of political unrest in the Himalayas.
Wow. Desai's novel is so rich,
It is.
touching on colonialism identity and the clash between tradition and modernity.
Right. And the characters are so real.
They are.
Their struggles feel so personal, but also, universal at the same time.
It's true.
It makes you think about how interconnected our lives are
Yeah,
and how our personal histories are tied to these larger forces of history and politics.
for sure.
And we can't forget Jhumpa Lahiri's The Namesake.
Oh, Lahiri is amazing at capturing the immigrant experience.
She is.
In The Namesake, she follows this Indian American family across generations.
Right.
Exploring all the challenges of assimilation, identity, and belonging in a new world.
It's such a relatable story for anyone who's ever felt stuck between two cultures, trying to find a balance between their heritage and their present reality.
It's a good reminder that family is both a source of comfort and conflict. It's where we learn about love and loyalty and forgiveness, but also where we face some of our biggest challenges.
So as we're wrapping up this part of our deep dive, what stands out to you from all these works and writers?
Oh, it's hard to pick just one thing. But I
No.
think what's most striking is just the sheer diversity of voices and perspectives.
Yeah.
Each writer brings something unique to the table,
Huh.
creating this vibrant and multifaceted picture of Indian life.
Yeah.
It's a literature that's both rooted in tradition and also really innovative,
Right.
constantly pushing boundaries and making us see the world in new ways.
I couldn't agree more. It's like reading these works opens a window into this world that's both familiar and strange.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's captivating and thought-provoking at the same time.
It is.
And it's incredible how these writers capture the little nuances of human relationships. The joys and sorrows, the betrayals and reconciliation that make up a life.
Mhm.
It's like they're holding up a mirror to our own lives.
Yeah.
Making us think about our own experiences with love and family and belonging. Yeah, it really is amazing how these stories can go beyond cultures, and connects with us on a human level.
Totally.
And it makes you think, despite all our differences, there are these universal things that tie us all together.
Yeah.
Like wanting love and belonging and the struggle with identity and finding meaning in this crazy world.
Right.
So as we're wrapping up our deep dive into this world of modern Indian literature, I'm curious, what are your thoughts? What themes or writers really stood out to you?
Well, for me, it's how these writers deal with the weight of history and how it affects people's lives.
Yeah.
Books like Train to Pakistan and A Fine Balance, they really show how these huge historical events can shape, personal destinies sometimes in really tragic ways.
Right.
It's a good reminder that the past isn't really gone,
Right,
It still
yeah.
shapes us today and into the future.
I agree. Those stories were really powerful.
Yeah.
It's like they're holding up a mirror to society,
Yeah.
making us confront these uncomfortable truths
Uh-huh.
and deal with the messy parts of our history.
It's true. What about you? What themes or writers really grabbed you?
Oh man, there were so many.
I know, right?
But I was really drawn to how they explored female identity
Oh, yeah.
and the challenges women face in a society that's changing so fast.
Right.
Writers like Anita Desai and Shashi Deshpande,
Oh, they're great.
they give us these really insightful looks at women dealing with societal expectations,
Mm-hmm.
and their own ambitions and trying to figure out who they are.
It's true.
Their stories are so empowering and they really make you think.
Yeah, and I think that's one of the things that makes this literature so interesting.
Yeah.
There's this real sense of urgency to the stories.
Right.
It's like these writers aren't just entertaining us,
Yeah.
they're pushing us to think critically about the world, to check our own biases and, really engage with these tough social and political issues.
I couldn't agree more. And it's important to remember that this is just a tiny taste of modern Indian literature.
Yeah, we've just scratched the surface here.
There's so much more out there waiting to be discovered.
So much.
So to our listeners out there, we encourage you to keep exploring.
Yeah.
Go find the works we talked about, check out new writers, and let these stories take you to a new place.
Exactly.
A place with amazing colors, rich traditions, and characters you won't forget.
It's a journey worth taking.
It is. You might be surprised by what you find and how these stories connect with your own life and your own point of view.
That's the beauty of it.
It is well said. Happy reading, everyone. And until next time, keep diving deep.